One of the more intriguing layers surrounding Undertale and Deltarune are the quote-unquote evil routes. Whether it's Undertale's No Mercy route or Deltarune's Weird route, it always fascinated me just seeing how bad things could really get. And regarding the Weird route in Deltarune, well, there's only 4 chapters so far, but things are already getting really freaking twisted. To catch you all up to speed, the Weird route doesn't officially start until Chapter 2, where amidst the truce that Chris and Noelle create, you go around prowling the Cyber City, hunting for Darkners to freeze in pursuit of getting stronger. Along your journey, you condition and manipulate Noelle into doing your bidding, whether it's putting enemies on ice, brute forcing puzzles, or stealing weapons. This all comes to a head at the end of the area where you confront Birdley, who in an effort to save Noelle from Chris, becomes her final victim, becoming fully encased in ice as a victim of Noelle's Snowgrave spell, a move described in universe as fatal. The route doesn't properly continue until Chapter 4, when Chris and Susie are invited to Noelle's house. It's there that Noelle confides in Chris after the events of Chapter 2, where Noelle was convinced that it was all just a dream. However, upon the soul regaining entry into Chris's body, they then proceed to let themselves be known in the light world, assuring Noelle that the dream that she thought she had was not a dream at all, and that everything that she experienced actually did happen. And despite Noelle's best efforts, she's unable to buy into the fantasy that Chris tried to protect her with. Recognizing the thorn that she used to put Birdley on ice, she is then forced to let the thorn be reinserted into her hand. And it's here we get into the main subject of this video. When Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 were initially released, the imagery to follow the sequence of events involved the wilting red rose. This cutscene originally sparked controversy because of the symbolism associated with flowers whenever they wilt. This symbolism can range from a loss of innocence to death itself. However, the most common interpretation for people who saw this cutscene when it first came out placed a very heavy focus on the fact that the rose itself was deflowered. I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about this, because this is a very sensitive and most likely triggering subject for a lot of you watching this video. As such, I wish to avoid inserting my own opinions on the matter until the very end. But for those of you who proceed, I'll try to be as respectful as possible. As the facts stand, the original imagery sparked a lot of outrage. The full extent I can't comment on because I wasn't actually there when this imagery was released, but ever since Chapters 3 and 4 were made available, Toby has actually censored this cutscene. It was later changed into a single red pixel on Noelle's hand, but it was later changed into a red shadow effect, which is what I saw when I played through the Weird route myself, which in my understanding, the shadow is over the illusion that protected Noelle's mind. Where we the player don't exist, we can't read her thoughts, and we didn't just make her murder her friend. And this new imagery did seem to work in placating the people who were outraged by the original scene, which was interpreted as having themes of sexual assault, if not outright rape. Now, I can see where the people saying this are coming from. To an extent, anyway. If you look at Chapter 4 in a vacuum, I do think it is reasonable that someone could come to this conclusion, which people are much more likely to do because there was a literal 3-year gap in waiting between Chapters 2 and 4. And beyond that, with how much coverage that Deltarune has been getting as of late, I can easily see random people taking this out of context, having never even played Deltarune before. In addition, Noelle's physical reaction to being forced to equip the Thorn Ring is clearly involuntary. Her mind says one thing, but her body does another, which vividly portrays an autonomous response. To that end, I do think it is reasonable that people could look at this and come to the conclusion that Deltarune's Weird route had themes of sexual assault. That being said, I do not believe that was what Toby was actually going for when he made this cutscene animation. And I'd like to take the time now to share how I interpreted this scene when I first saw it. Since I only started playing Deltarune when Chapters 3 and 4 were released, I never really had to wait to see what would happen next after Chapter 2's Weird route concluded. However, even if I didn't, it never once crossed my mind that there'd be any sexual undertones at all throughout the entirety of Chapter 2. I always interpreted the player and Noelle's relationship as that of a trainer and their Pokémon, where the trainer gives commands, the Pokémon obeys them, and they achieve a sort of symbiotic relationship. Remember that the gameplay of Chapter 2's Weird route largely involves Chris using Defend to build up TP so that Noelle can freeze all the enemies they encounter. Much like how in Pokémon, the trainer sends their Pokémon out, issues the command, and the Pokémon follows them. Even while you're not battling, you're issuing commands to Noelle to do your bidding, whether it's brute forcing puzzles or stealing weapons. Noelle herself even remarks that as long as she's listening to Chris's command, she will continue to get stronger, clearly establishing a dependence on Chris for guidance. Now obviously, Noelle isn't just your average everyday monster. She's her own person capable of feeling and thinking for herself. And as Chapter 2 proceeds, you do see that she grows more and more dependent on your input to make decisions. However, even with this all in mind, I still think the interpretation of sexual assault is inaccurate. I do think it is fair to say that the thorn ring being forcefully re-equipped in Noelle is assault, but sexual assault is much harder to define. At least as far as how I would interpret it, I perceive sexual assault as involving very intimate parts of the body, and I don't consider hands to be one of them. Neither Chris nor Noelle is ever depicted as showing any signs of romantic interest in each other either. Yes, a pattern of dependency has absolutely been established, but that wouldn't be indicative of sexual assault. If anything, that's much more indicative of grooming. Now, grooming can be sexual, but at its core, grooming is about conditioning someone for a certain act, or they'd become more comfortable doing something they'd ordinarily not be comfortable with. Throughout the entirety of Chapter 2, you're effectively conditioning Noelle to do basically anything in the pursuit of becoming stronger, up to and including theft and homicide. Moreover, the Addison who sells the freeze ring to you does it under the pretense that you're using it to get stronger, and not as a symbol of romantic interest. Which adds on to another point. I don't believe that love, in the traditional sense, could possibly be what Toby was intending. To make this point, however, we have to consider another one of Toby's works, in Undertale. Love has always had a double meaning. The traditional sense, and the acronym LOVE, level of violence, which in effect builds a numbness to the pain you'd be inflicting on others. What links these two points together is the fact that the ring that you get from Spamton, the Thorn Ring, further supports this. In the fight with Burley, Noelle's HP with the Thorn Ring equipped will drop to 55, which in Roman numerals reads out as LV. This pattern of dependency and proposing also clears up really well why Noelle finds herself unable to run away when you re-equip the Thorn. Which, yes, let's just make sure we had this abundantly clear, this is a clear-cut case of assault. Because anyone with eyes can clearly see that Noelle is not okay with this. But to call this assault sexual loses out on a lot of nuance surrounding what's actually happening. Noelle, in essence, has been groomed into a puppet, a prop that cannot act on their own. Deltarune as a whole is largely based around themes of freedom and being able to make your own decisions. With characters like Chris, Spamton, and even to an extent, us, the Soul, looking fervently for ways to break free from that control. And we've effectively awoken Noelle to that very reality, that now she finds herself to be a part of. Even with the assault not being sexual, this is absolutely horrifying. Especially knowing what kind of person that Noelle is, and how much it would mess her up to learn what she was made to do. It's why I personally believe that calling what happened to Noelle sexual assault is not only hyperbolic, but it also makes what she suffers from harder to relate to. Because it misses out on the overarching narrative that Deltarune has been built upon. Going back to the wilted rose, I see it as symbolic of the death of Noelle's innocence, as common as it is to see a wilted flower as a sign of lost virginity. It can also be interpreted as just a general loss of innocence, which for Noelle's situation is accurate. Following this revelation, Noelle is irrevocably traumatized. She can no longer believe that the Dark World never happened, that the creepiness surrounding Chris at the hospital and Noelle's watch was just a sadistic prank. And worst of all, that her pursuit of power saw Birdie be put on ice. It's difficult to imagine just how distraught this would leave Noelle, knowing that her nightmare was more than just a dream. And the wilted rose really is the cherry on top. Now, personally, I actually like the wilted rose animation a lot better than the shatter. I think it's a very creative way to portray the death of Noelle's innocence, and the rose itself offers a double meaning on the symbolism of love. Roses in particular are a flower known for being representative of love and passion. And the wordplay, when you consider the fact that love could stand for a level of violence, is very clear. Finally, it complements the thorn you force Noelle to equip, since roses are notorious for being covered in them, and like Spamton himself said, it might sting. Much like the truth Noelle was forced to recognize. It's honestly a brilliant way to illustrate just what Noelle just suffered through, and at least in my opinion, I like it a lot more than the shatter animation we have now. It's more immediately shocking, but it's less creative. It just reads to me as a generic symbol of Noelle being irrevocably broken. All the while, it doesn't tie into the symbolism of roses or love at all. I can't fault Toby for this, because I understand he was pressured into playing it safe this time around. And considering his popularity, I can respect why he feels the need to cater to his audience. But it does make me really sad that his art had to suffer for it. I mean, I could see someone reading into this animation that the seed planted in Noelle back in Chapter 2 finally sprouted at this very moment, but then the seed would no longer be able to properly convey Noelle's loss of innocence. And it wouldn't really explain her inability to control herself prior to equipping the Thorn Ring either. For that matter, I don't really like the interpretation that the Thorn Ring allowed us to leave a bit of our soul in Noelle. The reality is that Noelle was always capable of hearing us, even on the normal route. The Thorn Ring also has no real power in the light world, and is really just an ordinary regular old thorn. But this isn't to say that what happened to people in the dark world won't carry over into the light world, as evidenced by Birdly. Even in the normal route, defeating either him or Queen with violence will see his wing be broken. So freezing Birdly solid in the dark world to see that he is in a coma in the light world, Noelle would have to be able to recognize what this means. Which is why even though the thorn itself has no real power, its significance is very much apparent. I have to imagine that upon learning this truth, Noelle had to process the grief and guilt she now feels in the most comfortable way possible for her. That she now needs to become stronger, so that she can distance herself more and more from the one that she hurt. She will follow you into the dark, with your heart as the arc, guiding the way through the waves. Proceed. It's just sad to think that in a game that's so heavily focused on agency and being able to make your own decisions, paving your own path forward and finding true freedom, the creator found themselves bound to the will of his fans. Because of outrage and presumably clamoring for change over a cutscene that allegedly presented themes of sexual assault. But something about that really gets me. If sexual assault really was the intent, wouldn't censoring that be bad? Especially since this route in universe is described as forbidden, as in to say you shouldn't do it, where you as an individual are actively being shamed for playing the game in a way that is actively breaking how it's supposed to work, doing things that you realistically should not be allowed to do, and forcing grief onto people who have done absolutely nothing to warrant it. I ranted on this in a previous video, where I ranted on the Paper Mario TCYD remake and how it absolutely butchered the writing for Beldam and Vivian specifically. Because if beyond reason, sanitizing the more dark details of something can only make a product worse if you don't understand the original work. However, to be fair to Toby and Deltarune, I think the current imagery still works fine, it's just less effective. Unlike in the Thousand Year Door, where I'm honestly convinced that Beldam had a genuine reason not to like Vivian with how she would act over the pettiest crap. Not to mention, Deltarune's weird route actually demonizes grooming rather than trying to sugarcoat or celebrate it. If the weird route in Chapter 4 actually portrayed themes of sexual assault, then the wilted rose that Toby originally had in Deltarune would be demonizing it. Which is a good thing. You're very clearly not encouraged to do this to Noelle, so at least in my mind, it doesn't make sense to try and soften the blow for the people who actually are going down this path. Making people uncomfortable to the point where they don't want to see what happens next, if anything, I think should be the goal. And Toby himself is an excellent storyteller. If anyone can do it, I wholeheartedly believe that he can. But my feelings on this controversy aside, I'm not going to ask Toby to restore the cutscene. It isn't like I have the influence to make that happen anyway. I'm not going to ask you all to reconsider how you interpreted the imagery, because I believe every person's view to be equally as valid as Toby's himself, whether you're Mystic Slime, Shay, or Finnegan Fox 326. I'm not even going to ask you not to scapegoat heterosexual people because you can't engage with the media when it's uncomfortable for you. There is only one thing I will ask, and no, it's not to subscribe, I cannot care less about that. To all of you who corrected me on Chris's pronouns because I referred to her as a girl, I do as such because Chris has her church clothes present buttons on the left-hand side, which is common in women apparel. Call me whatever you want, but while you do, answer me this.
Since when were you the one in control.